Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. The big stories tonight. The government is eyeing to vaccinate as much as 60 million Filipinos, this as they target to achieve herd immunity in the country. The president wants the military to be first in line. Progressive lawmakers warn that the supposed rampant red tagging is a prelude to the government's crackdown under the Anti-Terror Act. The country's irrigation administration redirects blame for the massive flooding in Cagayan, pointing the finger at illegal logging and quarrying. After government raised entry salaries for public hospital nurses, those who have been in service for years are crying foul over a supposed mass demotion. And in what could be incumbent U.S. President Donald Trump's first sign of concession, a federal agency has already given the go signal for the transition of power in the White House. Let's start with President Rodrigo Duterte wanting the police and the military, which he called errand boys, to be priority recipients of the COVID-19 vaccine once available. But what about the medical frontliners and those living in COVID-19 epicenters? Maricel Halili with a big story.
The government is planning to inoculate 60 million Filipinos to achieve the so-called herd immunity in the country. During President Rodrigo Duterte's weekly address, Health Secretary Francisco Duque noted that this is achieved when at least 60% of the population receives vaccination, a standard set by the World Health Organization.
So if we're able to reach that, we're going to pretty much arrest the spread of this. And mawawala yung COVID-19 sa ating pong lipunan.
With most vaccine candidates requiring 2 shots, a 60 million population target may require 120 million doses. Palace spokesperson Harry Roque assured that 60 million Filipinos will be immunized regardless of required dosage. But as it stands, vaccines for 60 million Filipinos will cost 73.2 billion pesos, according to Finance Department.
Ang average cost, ang estimate namin sa average cost ng vaccine, around $25. Not per dose, per person. Di ba? Around $25, which is 1,200 pesos, more or less. Some are lower, some are higher. So we don't know yet exactly how much is the cost.
There's only 2.5 billion peso vaccine budget in the national spending plan. To augment that amount, the government will apply for loans with the Asian Development Bank and World Bank. It also considers domestic sources like Land Bank, the Development Bank of the Philippines, and other government corporations. It will also try to enter bilateral agreements with other countries, but those are not ironed out just yet. Some private companies will also cover the partial cost of the vaccine.
Yung allocation ng Pilipinas is approximately 3 to 5 million doses. At saka meron na tayong commitments as of today for up to 2 million doses to be funded by the private sector.
But aside from the financial aspects of the mass inoculation, another question is who will be the priority recipients of the COVID-19 vaccines. Galvez proposed that those who live in areas with the highest infection rate to be the first in line. The poorest of the poor or beneficiaries of 4Ps are also included.
And then from geographical, magiging sectoral. Meaning, kung sino yung priority natin doon, for example, sa Manila, yung urban poor, uunahin po natin yun. Yung mga vulnerable, uunahin po natin doon.
Medical frontliners are naturally priority recipients, but Duterte has VIPs in mind, the police and the military. The reason, they are supposed sacrifices as errand boys since the onset of the pandemic.
I need a healthy military and police. Kasi pag magkasakit lahat yan, wala na akong asahan.
Galvez also reported that the government is currently in talks with 4 major vaccine developers. These includes China's Sinovac and the United States' Pfizer, which earlier reported of its experimental vaccine's 95% efficacy. Though the government is more inclined to sign a deal with the United Kingdom's AstraZeneca, which pledged 20 million doses to the Philippines.
At nakita natin, ang AstraZeneca po, maganda po dahil kasi non-profit po ang sa kanya at saka pinakamababa po yung kanyang presyo. More or less $5 lang po.
Duterte said uniformed personnel will take charge of the vaccine distribution once available.
Secretary Anyo is here. He knows that he will have to marshal the forces of the local government to implement the orderly. Kaya sabi ko, police ang nandiyan para orderly. Walang unahan.
If things go as planned, Galvez projects that the nationwide vaccination may take place starting June next year. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Another COVID-19 vaccine is reporting progress. British drug maker AstraZeneca announced today Monday that its coronavirus vaccine is 70 to 90% effective. The vaccine on average prevented 70% of COVID-19 cases in late-stage trials in Britain and Brazil. The success rate, meanwhile, rose to 90% among trial participants who accidentally received a half dose followed by a full dose of the vaccine. AstraZeneca will have 200 million doses by the end of 2020, 4 times as many as its U.S. competitor Pfizer. 700 million doses of AstraZeneca's COVID shots could be ready globally by the end of the first quarter next year. Russia's Gamaleya Institute, meanwhile, reported a 95% efficacy rate in its Sputnik V vaccine based on the second interim analysis of its Phase 3 clinical trials. The calculations were based on initial data obtained 42 days after the first dose. Gamaleya says no unexpected adverse effects were reported during the trials, but monitoring of the participants will continue. The Health Department is reminding the public to not let their guard down as they start their Christmas shopping. The agency is also bracing for a possible post-holiday surge in COVID-19 cases. Greg Gregorio with the details.
With pedestrians walking almost shoulder to shoulder, observing physical distancing is nearly impossible in Divisoria, particularly along Elias Street. But for vendors, the stream of people during the weekend is a welcome reprieve.
Kahit na paano, kumita kami sa Sabado-Linggo lang po. Pero pag ganito na ordinaryong araw, ngayon wala pa kami boy na mano.
Jajakpating ka lang kung meron talagang pasunod-sunod. Yung iba talaga wala.
The Health Department warns the public to avoid going to congested places such as Divisoria following reports of a massive crowd last Sunday.
Ang risk po ng pagkakahawa-hawa ay napakalaki kapag tayo po ay nakakapunta sa mga lugar na maraming tao katulad nung sa Divisoria po nung weekend.
Despite warnings, Myra said she will still consider going back to Divisoria but vows to be cautious.
Bago magpasko, balak namin kasi madadating yung mga sahod. Parang kagaya po ngayon na ng face shield, face mask, social distancing, alcohol na laging bilin sa amin. Ganun.
But according to the DOH, risks remain high even with precautions, especially in crowded places. The DOH suggests the modern alternative, online shopping and virtual gatherings.
Pinapayuhan po namin kayong lahat na piliin niyo po ang mga online activities tulad ng online masses, mag-video calls na lang po sa mga kamag-anak at mga kaibigan at maaari din kung pwede mag-online shopping na lang.
But as they face growing competition online, vendors assure authorities that they are also being cautious.
Talagang lugi din kasi di ba ang dami ng online ngayon.
Hindi naman po kasi ako pumapasok dyan, dito lang po ako umuupo talaga. Kasi ako nag-iingat kaya sa sarili ko dahil itong virus na to, yung ibig sabihin, parang trahidor.
One vendor has ventured to online selling, but with the pandemic impacting business, they had to cut down their supply.
Dati marami kaming display. Ngayon kasi limited yung kuha namin kasi alam mo na, pandemic baka mamaya hindi maubos.
To ensure the public's compliance on minimum health standards, Manila Police District personnel are doing random inspections in Elias Street and even in nearby Tabora Street where there is a smaller crowd. Health Secretary Francisco Duque III now warns of a possible surge in COVID-19 cases after the holidays.
Bubuo rin ang DOH ng contingency plan upang handa po tayo kung sakaling magkaroon po tayo na tinatawag natin post-holiday season surge in the number of cases. Na habang ang bilang ng kaso ay patuloy na pababa, hindi ito dapat na maging dahilan upang tayo ay maging mas maluwag or complacent.
The DOH has earlier called for a safer celebration of the holidays, advising against karaoke and gatherings. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
The standard retail price for RT-PCR tests is expected to be released this week, explaining why it took them 2 weeks to come up with the price cap. Trade Undersecretary Ruth Castelo told Radio 5 they took the time to carefully study and draft the guidelines in consideration of both public and private laboratories. Castelo says the draft of the Joint Administrative Order on the price cap is now on its final stages.
Hindi po pwede na basta na lang ilabas natin yung price cap. Kailangan po talaga thoroughly studied yan. Pati po yung guidelines na dinadraft natin para po sigurado na hanggang implementation, we can follow through. Hindi po pwede kasi na ilabas lang yung presyo, tapos sa implementation, hindi na natin masundan. Kaya po medyo matagal lang. Pero actually, we're already in the final stages for signature na po ng principals natin, Secretary Duque and Secretary Lopez.
We'll go for a quick break. When the big story returned, some senators were left confused after progressive lawmakers from the Makabayan bloc did not denounce communist groups. And the country's irrigation chief shifts the blame on illegal logging and mining for the massive flooding in Cagayan. The details later. Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. Appearing before the Senate, the Makabayan bloc distanced themselves from communist groups but did not denounce the movement entirely, and that left some senators confused. Mian Los Baños tells us how the hearing went.
The Makabayan bloc has time and again denied outright allegations that they are members of the CPP, NPA, NDF. At the Senate hearing on Tuesday, minority lawmakers claim that their group has been the favorite target of the government's red tagging activity.
Tahasan kong sinasabi sa komiting ito, Mr. Chair, na hindi ako miyembro ng Communist Party of the Philippines, hindi ako rebelde, at hindi ako miyembro ng National Democratic Front of the Philippines. I am not engaged in the armed struggle. I do not support or espouse the violent overthrow of the state. And I do not recruit for the New People's Army or any armed group. Hindi po ako rebelde, Mr. Chair.
Other red tagging victims have also appealed to the upper chamber to put a stop on the activity. Kabataan Party List Representative Sara Elago was in tears as she explained how the government allegedly spreads fake news about her using military pages on social media.
Mismo ang Commission on Human Rights at ang pinakahuling mga ulat ng UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights ang naglalahad kung gaano delikado para sa mga buhay at sa aming mga pamilya ang maging biktima ng red tagging.
The National Intelligence Coordinating Agency or NICA insisted that red tagging is not a policy of the government.
Ang ginagawa po ng gobyerno ay pinapaalam po sa lahat ng mga kababayan natin sa buong bansa ang katotohanan tungkol sa CPP, NPA, NDF at ang kanilang mga front organizations.
This was opposed by former Bayan Muna Representative Nery Colmenares.
My God, Mr. Chair, when they speak in public, parang Bible truth ang kanilang sinasabi na alam namin yan, may ebidensya kami. But pag tinanong sila dito, we're still building up a case. Hindi po ba pwedeng ipagbawal yan? You're still building up a case, pero pag sa publiko, vilification, profiling, mudslinging.
Other alleged former NPA members like Jeffrey Celis also testified against the Makabayan Solons.
Kahit 2 beses siyang isinuka sa Antique at sa kanya mga pagkukunwari, malinaw po ng kanilang bahagi ay dugtong, suporta at ugnayan para palakasin ang estratehikong linya at direksyon ng CPP-NPA-NDF, which is ibagsak ang gobyerno sa pamamagitan ng armadong pagkilos.
But former Bayan Muna Representatives Colmenares and Chodoro Casino said his testimony is just based on mere recall. Makabayan members also revealed that Celis was once part of the drug list before he came out and surrendered to the government. Despite distancing themselves from communist groups, minority lawmakers said they could not denounce them as enemies. Casino said the rebel groups have the reasons, something that Senator Panfilo Lacson said he could not reconcile.
Kami, sumusweldo tayo sa gobyerno, sila sumusweldo sa gobyerno. And then, eto yung mga miyembro nila na sumampa sa NPA na lumalaban sa gobyerno o sa Estado. Kasi armed na ito eh. I'm not talking of street parliamentarians or yung mga protest rallies na sinasalihan. Iba na ito kasi laban ng giyera na ito at nagpapatayan na. And that's why I was surprised doon sa sagot ni dating Congressman Teddy Casino na hindi nila pwedeng i-denounce. Kaya sabi ko, hindi ko kaya reconcile.
In a separate press briefing held by officials of the NSC and the NTF-ELCAC, National Security Advisor Hermogenes Esperon said Makabayan lawmakers are seemingly washing their hands off their supposed involvement in encouraging the youth to join the communist group and take up arms.
They want to convince us that they are a good organization and they are the only one good organization who have the moral high ground to take reforms. They want also to deny from their testimonies that they kill innocent people, burn construction equipment, and radicalize and recruit many of our youth.
For Esperon, there's nothing wrong in being an activist and pursuing personal advocacies, but he advised against joining the armed struggle. Reporting for News 5, Mean Los Baños, we are One News.
Finger-pointing over the massive flooding in Cagayan continues, but the National Irrigation Administration insists the fault was not with them. Their defense in this report by Ria Fernandez.
The National Irrigation Administration is washing its hands off the massive flooding that struck Cagayan and Isabela over a week ago. During the House hearing, NIA Administrator Ricardo Visaya noted that it was Pag-asa which directed the discharge of water from Magat Dam. Visaya said they immediately informed stakeholders and households 6 hours before the scheduled water release upon receiving instruction from Pag-asa on November 9. This is 2 days before Typhoon Ulysses first made landfall. Visaya also insisted that Magat Dam only contributes 15% of excess water whenever Cagayan River overflows. He showed a matrix detailing Magat Dam's water inflow and outflow during Typhoon Ulysses. Both instances showed the Magat Dam with peak water inflow higher than its water discharge. However, water level of the Buntun Bridge still reached 13 meters during Typhoon Ulysses, despite the dam's lower water inflow and outflow compared to Typhoon Emong's level.
Is it really Magat Dam that provides or the major cause of the flooding in Cagayan? I don't think so. Kung ini-implement lang mabuti ang mga anti-illegal logging na activities, yung mga sa illegal mining, illegal quarrying, maybe we can prevent the flooding of Cagayan River.
But Marikina Representative Stella Kimbo questioned why water spilling activities are only determined through rainfall and typhoon track.
So kung ang taga San Niño ay napakaliit na tabo at hindi batya, ibig sabihin ay talagang aapaw po yan, di ba? So, just to set the record straight, hindi po kasama yan sa technical consideration and you only consider the track of the typhoon and amount of rainfall.
NIA has already created a task force to study if there is a need to amend the dam protocol that the agency has adopted since 2006. But for Minority Leader Joseph Paduano, overseeing disasters should be the primary responsibility of the Office of Civil Defense. He said the agency should have a technical staff of its own and not merely rely on advisories.
Tingnan mo, Mr. Chair, the OCT supposedly administers all disaster-related activities in this country.
In one.
Sama Representative Edgar Sarmiento, on the other hand, thinks the OCD should be placed directly under the Office of the President, giving its head a cabinet secretary post. Deputy Majority Leader Bernadette Herrera further pushed for the creation of Department of Disaster Resilience. Office of Civil Defense Chief Ricardo Halad believes otherwise.
If we utilize all the expertise of the whole government, malakas ho tayo. I don't think we can duplicate all the expertise of the government agencies.
Halad also stressed the need for flood control infrastructure. The DPWH admitted having an anti-flood master plan for Cagayan as early as 2002. However, it did not push due to a hefty 90 billion peso budget requirement. Cagayan is now facing the challenge of attending to the needs of 120,000 families affected by Typhoon Ulysses. For News 5, Rio Fernandez, we are One News.
And these are the other big stories today. The Chinese embassy in Manila has slammed the supposed unreasonable remarks of U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien regarding the maritime dispute in the South China Sea. The embassy says that O'Brien's remarks incite confrontation and they are full of Cold War mentality. It added that his visit only sought to create chaos in the region. The Chinese embassy also questioned the U.S. frequent sending of warships and planes in the South China Sea, despite it not being a claimant. China says it firmly believes that the Philippine government will stand on the right side of history. Labor Secretary Silvestre Abello III clarifies that the Department of Labor has yet to issue any work stoppage order for the Skyway Extension project after the deadly accident involving a steel girder. In a TV interview, Bello said that he was not aware of any order suspending work in the construction site. The labor chief said he is still waiting for the report of other concerned Department of Labor officials before issuing an order. On Monday, Dole NCAR ordered EEI Corporation and its subcontractors to halt work on the Skyway Extension project. The Supreme Court, sitting as the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, has dropped the show cause order issued against Solicitor General Jose Calida and a Manila Times reporter. News 5 sources say it was Associate Justice Marvic Leonen, the subject of Calida's inhibition motion, who told the PAT that he would rather forgive the two, as forgiveness is, quote, often the more decent consequence of another's misunderstanding. Vice President Leni Robredo, meanwhile, reiterated her call for Marcos to respect the results of the recount in pilot provinces and to junk the electoral protest. We'll take another break. When we come back, a group of nurses are criticizing government's move to raise the salary of entry-level nurses. And it is official, President-elect Joe Biden can now start his transition to the White House. The details next. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. The Budget Department vows to address the concerns of nurses who are crying foul over the supposed mass demotion implemented by the agency. The DBM is defending the move. They say it only intended to upgrade the salary of entry-level nurses. Marian Enriquez with this report.
Kasi yung SRA namin tsaka HACCP hindi pa na nabigay sa amin.
It was year 2006 when 49-year-old Jean worked as a nurse 2 at the Philippine General Hospital after serving as nurse 1 for 7 years in Eastern Samar. She devoted more than 12 years in Manila as a nurse 2, which is a salary grade 15 position with an income of 32,000 pesos per month. But as the pandemic struck, Jean fears for her position. Based on the Budget Department's memorandum circular issued on July 17, the Nurse 2 position with a salary grade 15 was given the lower rank of Nurse 1. The memo is being used by some government hospitals as basis against a general salary increase for nurses. The intent of the circular is to upgrade the entry-level salary of nurses from salary grade 11 or 22,000 pesos per month to salary grade 15 or about 32,000 pesos per month. But for Nurse Jean, the move only felt like a demotion, considering that she has been serving as a nurse for 21 years now.
Masaya kami para sa Nurse 1. Pero huwag naman palungkutin yung mga matagal na dito na nagsakripisyo. Huwag naman po kami sanang parang nagagago kami. Mga professionals po kami, tapos ginaganyan kami.
The Filipino Nurses United also claimed that this policy is demeaning and unjust for government healthcare workers.
Ang ginawa nila, imbis na iangat, di po ba, natural kapag itinaas mo yung ibaba, tataas yung kasunod. Pero ang ginawa nila, para hindi po sila mamroblema sa budget, yung Nurse 2, ibinaba nila ng Nurse 1 o edi dati pa rin ang sweldo.
But the Budget Department insists there's no demotion. The agency said the circular merely operationalized the Supreme Court ruling to upgrade the salary of Nurse 1 from SG11 to SG15. Budget Secretary Wendell Avisado, though, vowed to take immediate measures to resolve the said issue with the Department of Health. The Health Department has already issued a memorandum in October, temporarily suspending the implementation of the DBM circular, which they said is causing confusion. The FNU claims that this is not being followed in other hospitals. Both departments are now in talks to resolve the matter.
Maayos na po yan at magkaroon na ng panibagong standards para yung mga dapat na ma-promote sila kung mag-qualify sila. So yung Nurse 2 ngayon na parang salary grade 15 pa rin, magiging salary grade 17 na yan. And so on and so forth.
The group of nurses also calls for the removal of the 5,000 cap for healthcare workers who are allowed to leave the country. The group reiterated that it cannot be considered a total lifting of the ban if the government will only allow a limited number of health workers to benefit from the ban suspension. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
People Asia has recognized the MVP Group as a special awardee in this year's roster of Men Who Matter for its support in the nation's fight against COVID-19. Led by Chairman Manny V. Pangilinan, the MVP Group, which owns this channel, was given the award for paying in advance more than 10 billion pesos in taxes to help aid government during the crisis. The award was virtually received by MVP Group's Media Bureau Managing Director Attorney Mike Toledo in last night's awarding ceremony for Men Who Matter and Women of Style and Substance. Other Men Who Matter awardees included San Miguel Corporation's President and COO Ramon Ang, St. Luke's President and CEO Dr. Arturo de la Peña, and BCDA President and CEO Vince Dizon. Despite refusing to accept defeat in the recent polls, U.S. President Donald Trump has cleared the way for President-elect Joe Biden to begin his transition to the White House. The U.S. agency in charge of handling presidential transitions told Biden on Monday that the handover process can formally begin. This means Biden will now get access to resources that had been denied him due to legal challenges seeking to overturn his win. Biden's team will now have federal funds and a transition office until he takes office he takes his oath on January 20. He and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will also receive regular national security briefings similar to what Trump gets. Despite green-lighting the transition, Trump insists he will not go down without a fight. In a tweet, the president said he will continue to pursue legal avenues despite giving the green light on Biden's transition, a move which many consider is the closest thing to a concession from the outgoing U.S. president yet. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. Now, for more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News. Good evening.